He came around and wrapped his up in saran wrap and said, "I want to try something. It won't even touch you." And so he spun me around, pulled down my pants, and entered me. I pulled my pants up and I walked out.
What's saran
and he
wrap?
said, "You're not going to tell mom and dad about this, are you?"
This is her brother?
We were playing one day, and innocently enough, we were playing house, and he told me to pull down my pants.
Oh, the clear wrap.
And he grabbed a flashlight and shone it right onto all of my private parts and asked me to turn around, taking a very close inspection.
How
we were
far
interrupted
her
by
brother?
my mom at the time, and she yelled and called us for dinner. And so that was the end of our very first instance. We went shortly thereafter. My brother asked if we could have a sleepover downstairs. He wanted to teach me about. I looked up to him. He was the one person, because my mom was so unpredictable, that I felt close to, that he would protect me if I ever needed it. So in that sense, he kind of took advantage of it. And so as we laid there together in bed, he told me to take off all of my clothes, and he took off all of his, and he laid his entire body on top of me and back and forth and up and down. And as I laid there, I felt the air just suffocate through my lungs, and I couldn't breathe. And I learned for the first time to disassociate and be able to look around the room and think about where I would rather be instead of in that moment. And as we got older, it just progressed worse and worse. And so he then told me about... And so he had come in one day and pulled down his pants and grabbed my hand and wrapped it around himself. I had no idea that, this was entirely inappropriate and that this shouldn't have happened. This wasn't the relationship that I had wanted between him and I, but it was the only one that I knew of. It wasn't until I was 12 years old, in the last instance, where he came around the corner, and as I was sitting in the living room, he came around and wrapped his up in saran wrap and said, "I want to try something. It won't even touch you." And so he spun me around, pulled down my pants, and entered me from behind and me. As the pain hit me, I remember thinking, this is not fun. I don't want to be a part of this. This is not what I want. This doesn't feel good. And I felt it through my entire body. But I knew that my mom was coming home soon, and I wanted to get all of my chores done. And so I pulled my pants up and I walked out, and he said, "You're not going to tell mom and dad about this, are you?" And that was the last that we had spoke about it. It was a secret that I had kept for 25 years. After that had happened, I went through this phase of no confidence. I cut off all of my hair. I thought perhaps it would just be a way to be less attractive. I know that he had, partner after partner, and had this, promiscuous type of behavior that was going on, where he was cheating and that sort of thing. Right. And I actually went through the exact same thing. I had no confidence, and for me it was about pleasing everybody else and finding approval. And so I lost my virginity at a very young age to an older boy, and I was not ready, but it was the pressure that I felt to please, to do exactly what he said, to make him happy, that allowed me to lose every bit of confidence and dignity that I had. My mom was a complex character. She was loving, she was caring, she was supportive, but at the same time, on the other hand, she had undiagnosed borderline and narcissistic personality disorder. At the turn of a flip, could be somebody that was raging, somebody that was
that's every
unpredictable, and somebody that was unloving. Her and I at times would get along, but for the most of my life, I felt like I was always trying to live up to her expectations. I saw how she loved my older brother, and so I grew up always wondering what it was that I did wrong, what it was about me that she couldn't love. And it wasn't until later in my life that I understood that she was jealous. And as I grew older and as I grew into myself, the control that she had over me just took over. She was physically abusive from a very young age. Like, we were spanked and that sort of thing. And I guess growing up in that generation, it was a normal occurrence to have happen. But it really wasn't until I got into university that she started to become physical. I was the first person in my family to go to university, and that was one thing that she had always held over me. It was, you think you're better than everybody else, when in fact it wasn't that. I was just trying to, enable myself to find a secure foundation and, get the hell away from my family. She barged into my room, and I had just gotten out of the shower. It was a Sunday night, and I had gotten home from cheerleading. I was exhausted. I was going to school full time, and I was working 2 jobs and coaching cheerleading on top of that. And I had gotten home. I was exhausted, and she barged open my bedroom door as I was standing there in a towel, hair dripping wet, and she started the fight of, you think you're better than everybody else. At the time, I was only 100 pounds maybe, and she was bigger than I was. And she wound up and punched me in the face. And it wasn't until after that I pushed her away and pushed her out of my room, put all my body weight into it, that I curled up in the fetal position in my towel, and I wanted to commit. So all of these thoughts that had gone through my brain as to how I could do it, whether it was hanging myself in the closet,
this is crazy as fuck,
or taking my car and driving it into a lamppost, or jumping off of the bridge. I just wanted it all to stop. When I went to school the next day, I thought about getting help. They had a student help center, and as you walk by it, you thought, maybe I deserve some help. But that wasn't the case, because I knew that if I went there, that they would admit me to a psych facility or, someplace that I was under watch for. And I knew that would make it worse. My body started showing symptoms of MS. And so I went through every single test. I had doctors and chiropractors and everybody saying, well, for sure, that's exactly what it is. We'll confirm diagnosis through scans and neurologists. And everything came back negative. The doctors were shocked, as was I. And it wasn't until my doctor said, well, you must just have depression. Let's get a therapist, and, we'll go with it that way. And so I started with therapy, and it was more of you need to eat healthy and get out and exercise and get fresh air, and everybody's going through the same thing. And, I knew at that point that this is not exactly what it was. I took a week, and I sat there and I thought about it, and I said, okay, if I'm going to go dark and I'm going to go deep, I'm going to acknowledge that this happened. And by this time, I was 37 years old, a mother of 2, and I understood over the last number of years that it had reared its head. It was something that for 2 years, the first thing in my mind that woke up was, your brother to you. I had sat in that for 4 or 5 days prior to telling the first person, which was my husband. And by this point, I had been married and divorced and married again, and my marriage, I found, for the second time in my life, was crumbling. At the brink of my marriage dissipating, I sat there and I said, do you want to know what's going on with me in therapy? And you can tell me. And so for the first time in my life, I said, when I was a little girl, I was abused by my brother. He broke down and became just completely distraught with this information. And it was a physical, visceral feeling to myself that all of these bugs were flying out of my mouth, just thousands and thousands like you see in the movies. It was shortly after that I spoke to my dad about it. He had ended up telling my mom. She never responded by Saturday. She never responded by Sunday. And it was 3 days until she reached out, and she finally called me on Monday morning. And she said, well, don't you think we should talk about this? And I said, okay. And so I took her through every memory that I had of the abuse, the exposure to that he exposed me to, or the manual stimulation, and then finally when I was 12. And her first comment and thought to say was, well, why didn't you just say no? It broke me. It completely broke me that was her response. It wasn't, I'm sorry, like my father's and my husband's was. She went on and on to talk about how she had always told us never to let anybody touch you. So as my mother and I sat there talking about the abuse for the first time, she confided and told me for the first time that she too was abused by her brother. And
What
it
the
was
fuck?
nothing to the same extent. It happened one time, or so she said, but her brother, her older brother, had blindfolded her, had asked her to take off all of her clothes, and then he himself all up and down her body. She minimized the abuse in that moment and pulled it back and made it about her. And so that was classic, typical my mom. Because of that, we got into an argument, and I said, do you think because you've been through that you wouldn't have been more aware, more self-aware to say between your own children that it wasn't okay?
Holy shit.
We ended up doing a family intervention, which was, I would say, probably more traumatic than it was helpful at the time. And for every book that I had read about abuse, it had always said never confront your abuser, because they could always deny it and they can always re-traumatize or minimize your feelings. We drove to Saskatoon and we sat in a circle around in his house. And my brother Chad is married, but his wife had said it happened before me and my time, so it has nothing to do with me, which, being a mother of two girls as well, I thought was, pretty naive to say. And so as we sat there, my dad, my mother, my husband, we walked and went around the room and spoke about how the abuse had affected our family and ourselves. I should have thought about this before, but the speech that I had read was maybe 5 pages. It was everything that I had ever wanted to say to him, and the effects of how the abuse affected my life, really. As he acknowledged it and spoke at the end of it, he admitted everything. I didn't need his apology. It wasn't something that I really wanted, but the acknowledgement of the abuse allowed my family to see that I wasn't lying. But my mom stood up and she walked out. She said that she was done talking about it and that she wasn't going to be a part of it anymore. And so it was shortly thereafter I had come back to Calgary, and we spent maybe 2 or so weeks that we didn't talk to each other. One day she picked up the phone and she called, and I was frantically cleaning my kids' toys up. I said, are you not going to acknowledge any part of this or what had happened? And she said, no, I'm done talking about this. You have too much time on your hands. You need to forget about it and get back on your horse and move on. I asked her why it took her 3 days to...
That's crazy, bro.
And she said, well, what does it matter? What does it matter how many days it took? And I asked her why she never disclosed the abuse that had happened to her.
Oh my God, bro.
She allowed us to bathe together. She minimized every single question that I had, and I knew I wasn't going to get the responses that I was hoping for. And so from that point on, I said to her, I need a break. I need you, and I need to be able to heal on my own. She said, well, if you don't want me in your life, then that's fine. Have a good life. And she hung up the phone. And so that truly was the end of our relationship.
What a mother.
About a year later, where I got a call from my dad, and I answered the phone, and I realized I was on speakerphone. And so she answered and said, hello, Amber. I have cancer. It's liver cancer. And well, that's fatal. I apologized that she was going through that, and I tried to keep her spirits high. And so my girls and I, we put together a cancer care package. We gave it to her, and I brought them to Saskatoon to say their goodbyes. And so at the very last conversation that I had with her, I was hoping for closure. I was hoping to hear something from her.
Piece of shit, mom, bro.
I don't know, made up for everything that I had been through, something of an apology or something, inspiring to say you can be better than me or whatnot. But she failed on that accord. She said, I'm not a narcissist and I'm not the worst mother in the world. And so we left it unsaid, and it wasn't but 6 weeks later that she died. This is my book. It is called The Obedient Daughter. It is a personal story of triumph and healing, and it takes you through every
Amber Nicole Hayes
life in the abuse that has happened, how I have conquered it, and where I am.
Fuck, bro.
The advice that I would have for anybody that has experienced anything similar to myself, first and foremost, is to speak your truth. And secondly, it is to find love and support to and from those around you.
Fuck, bro. What a fucking story, bro.